Welcome back to Colonial versus Modern. If you're like me, you love to start your day off with a hot cup of coffee. Thomas Jefferson called it the favorite drink of the civilized world. So that we are not spending too long in one day on this, we are going to split this into a two-part episode. Today, when you go into a store, you're faced with many types of roasted coffee, not to mention buying pre-ground or whole bean coffee for grinding yourself. But that was not always the case, especially in the colonial era. Coffee beans are actually seeds and are found in the berries that grow on the coffee bush. While originally from Ethiopia, it is unknown who the first person to discover and drink coffee was. But by the 17th century, this dark drink had made its way to Europe. When it first arrived in Europe, it caused many arguments, as many people believed that it was the bitter invention of Satan. But it gained papal approval when Pope Clement VIII tried it and liked it. By the mid-17th century, there were 300 coffee houses in London, and it began to replace beer and wine as the most popular breakfast drink. In the 17th century, the Dutch became some of the first Europeans to begin spreading coffee across the world when they took it to Java, where it was successfully grown. In 1723, a young French naval officer, Gabriel Decaux, successfully carried a seedling from the royal gardens in Paris across the sea to the island of Martinique, where the plant thrived, and within 50 years, coffee was being grown throughout the Caribbean. Though coffee had been introduced to New Amsterdam, later to be renamed New York, by the mid-17th century, tea remained the preferred drink in America. It was not until 1773, when the Tea Act was passed, that coffee consumption took off in America. As Americans boycotted tea, they turned to coffee for their hot, caffeinated drink. John Adams wrote his wife, Abigail, "Tea must be universally renounced, and I must be weaned, and the sooner the better." In the early years of coffee consumption, beans were purchased unroasted and green. Before brewing, one had to spend time roasting them. Continuously tossing and shaking was very important so that your beans would be evenly roasted and not burned. There were several items that would allow you to do this. The most basic was the flat-bottom skillet. By placing them in the skillet over the heat and tossing them around, you could roast the beans. But you had to be very careful not to spill them and to keep them moving. If you could get a special coffee roasting skillet, both not spilling and not burning became a bit easier, as their bowl shape kept the beans in the skillet while tossing and shaking them, and the shape also allowed them to more easily be continuously stirred. Probably one of the best options was to put the beans in a cylinder at the end of a spit. You could stay farther back from the heat, but you did not have to worry about losing your beans while still being able to continuously rotate them. In London in 1722, Humphrey Broadbent published his preferred method for roasting the perfect beans. "I hold it best to roast them in an iron vessel full of little holes, made to turn on a spit over a charcoal fire, keeping them continually turning and sometimes shaking them that they do not burn." Once the beans were finished roasting, they would be dumped and spread out on a flat plate to cool. In the mid-18th century, the brothers John and Charles Arbuckle became the first people to sell pre-roasted coffee by the pound. They had purchased a self-emptying coffee bean roaster that was invented by Jabez Burns. Once roasted, the beans were ready to be ground. In colonial America, people either used a mortar and pestle or a Turkish coffee grinder, which resembles a very large pepper grinder. The first American patent for a new coffee grinder came in 1798 from Thomas Jefferson's dentist, Thomas Bruff. But It wasn't until about 1860 that pre-ground packaged coffee was sold by Louis A. Osborne. The first electric grinder was patented in 1898 by the Hobart Manufacturing Company. Join us next week as we finish up our look at America's favorite hot breakfast beverage and how it has been brewed through the ages.